but she won't be following the chat. Your questions will be monitored, and we'll call on you to unmute and ask your questions after her presentation as time allows. Applause is hard to do on Zoom, but if you would like to show your appreciation, what we'd like you to do is please wave your fingers like this on the screen, and that will show the speaker that you are appreciating them, and it's our way of doing a Zoom applause without, but while being muted. There are two options for your Zoom settings for the view that you've got. If you see everybody's box right now, that is the gallery view. It's at the top right-hand corner of your screen usually. It might be at the bottom, but generally it's at the top in the right-hand corner, and it'll say gallery view or speaker view. I recommend you choose speaker view so that the person who's speaking is highlighted, but it's up to you. If you want to be checking out everybody else who's in the room, that's fine. We will also be spotlighting the speaker during the presentation. If you experience any issues with your Zoom, like the sound or other challenges during the call, you can send a private chat. Hopefully you all know how to do that. I think it's at the bottom of your screen is a setting for chat. And you can open that up, click on that, and send a chat to Liz Lowry, who is volunteering to be our admin person for the call today. And she's also learning, so please be kind and understanding, but we will do our best to support you and resolve any problems that come up. And I want to thank Liz for her support today. As far as the agenda is concerned, our speaker will present until noon, and then we'll offer a 15-minute Q&A. We're recording the presentation, but not the Q&A. So if you choose to, you can turn off your video, and then your screen will be black instead of being your picture being recorded. So that's up to you, and you can also change your name in the Zoom box. So if you find your name in the Zoom box, you can click on it and you can change it to an anonymous, anything you like. If you need help doing any of that, please check with Liz and she'll try and help you out with that in the chat box. Watch the Kolat Mayim website for information on the recording afterwards. We hope that it will work, but it may not, because this is our first time. But hopefully we'll be able to share it afterwards. We will keep the Zoom room open after the presentation for about 10 minutes so that people can have a chance to socialize if they want. But please feel free to leave at the end of the Q&A if you like. So Liz, if you could spotlight Shoshana now, and I just want to warmly welcome Shoshona Litman, who will present a talk on building Jewish culture through stories and songs. I'm personally in a Rosh Chodesh women's group with Shoshana, and she has been a delight to share experiences with her. She shares her storytelling in that community, and her stories are always thoroughly engaging, very wise, full of humor and uplifting. Shoshana is Canada's first ordained Maggidah, which is quite an accomplishment. Maggidah is a female Jewish storyteller and teacher, and she has been spinning her stories since 1997. And she blends universal truths from Judaism and other traditions into her stories. Shoshana is a mother, a poet, an author, a field biologist, a singer, but storytelling is what runs through everything that she does. So please join me in welcoming Shoshana Litman.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was awesome. And I want to thank you for organizing all this and inviting me, and also Rabbi Lynn and all the folks like Liz and Ann and Sam and Aaron that are working on the technical side of things. I appreciate that. So just to set the context, we humans, we're a storytelling species. That's what we do, right? Whether it's the conversations we have with each other about what's going on in our lives, or the stories we tell ourselves in our own mind, whether they're true or false. We're always doing this. And then if we want to elevate it through our expression or appreciation of music, poetry, novels, movies, videos, it's what we do. And it doesn't have to be the arts. I had a lawyer once say to me, hey, if you don't have a good story, you're not going to win your case. And we Jews, we are a storytelling people, whether it's our words, our prayers, our music, our songs, our hands. This is what we do too. And if you look at our core text, the written and the oral Torah was kept verbal for thousands of years before it was written down, full of stories. And what's known as the 5 books of Moses, the first 2, mainly stories. You start with Genesis. In Hebrew, it's Bereshit, in the beginning, God, Adam, and Eve, all the way to Joseph and his brothers going down to Egypt. And then Exodus, out they come again with Moses and Miriam and Aaron. And that story is our core story. Most Jews celebrate Passover, and that's where we're recalling that story. And if you really take it to heart and you live it, you will not persecute or oppress others, because we know what it's like as a people to be oppressed. So that's a story we have still to integrate as a people. And if you go back right to the beginning of our Torah, the very first 3 words, Bereshit, bara, Elohim. There you go. It says, in the beginning of God's creating. Creating, that's present tense. It's not like there was this big bang and then voila, here we are. No, it's an ongoing process over billions of years, and we are a part of it. And when we tap into our creativity in whatever form that takes, I believe we can lift ourselves up, lift up each other, and lift up the world. Now this, I believe, is the true calling of a Maggid or a Maggidah, a Jewish storyteller. But I didn't know all this when I was getting started. I was just telling stories. I started out with stand-up poetry. Then I had young kids who wanted to hear stories. So I would read with feeling, and I would sometimes tell them stories. And I joined the Victorious Storytellers Guild, which is a great way to get practice telling stories to adults and listening to stories from adults. Listening takes it's an art form in itself. But I was kind of just doing all this off the corner of my desk. And then when my kids got more independent and it was time for me to rejoin the workforce, the first job I got was because I was a mom that liked to tell stories. My boss thought I'd be good at social marketing for a program called Way to Go. Good name, eh? Way to Go school program. And my job was to convince parents that there were other ways to get their kids to school besides driving them in their own private vehicle right to the door. And I did that for 8 years. And then, governments change, priorities change. We could see that this job was going to end. And I was kind of looking around for what's next. And I was also becoming a Baal Tshuva. That's someone who returns to the tradition. And this came as a shock to my very secular family. I mean, I wasn't religious when I got married or when my kids were small. And now all of a sudden I want to observe the laws of the Sabbath, food laws, kosher laws. I mean, I got some pushback on this when I was doing the outer practice. But if I worked on inner practice through something called Mossar, which seeks to uplift the soul by correcting the personality, and I became more kind, calm, patient. Hey, what's not to like? I could make some progress with this. Now, Mossar was going through a renaissance at that time, thanks to an anthropologist in Vancouver named Alan Marinis, who I happen to know. And he had gone through a crisis in his own life, discovered Mossar, found a teacher in a little yeshiva, a little Orthodox college in Far Rockaway, New York, wrote about it, several books, and he started an institute called the Mossar Institute. So I went to some conferences that they put on in San Francisco, a couple around Chicago, and it was at the Chicago one that I took a workshop called Mossar at Work, right? I'm trying to figure out what's next. And I really wanted to tell a story at this conference, but I hadn't done my homework. I hadn't talked to anyone about it. So I just mentioned it to one of the conference organizers, and they said, well, our program is already set, but you're going to a workshop, maybe tell it there. So I checked with the workshop facilitator, and they said, sure, great way to end the workshop, just tell a story. So I told one of my favorite stories. I call it Choose Heaven, very famous story known as Heaven and Hell, but I kind of changed it a bit. And I'm not going to tell the whole thing, because you can just go to my YouTube channel, which I believe will be up in the chat room or somewhere, and you can get that. And you can just listen to it. But I can summarize it real easy. It's told all over the world, always the same. There's 2 rooms, lots of food, delicious food in each room, but you can't get the food yourself. The Jewish version is your arm won't bend. And in the first room, which is hell, everybody gets hangry and they start fighting. Second room is heaven. We feed each other. And so at the end of this story, I gave a blessing, which is a very Maggidic thing to do, but I didn't know it at the time. I just thought it's a good way to end the story. So this is what I said. I said, I pray that each day, each one of us learns to recognize hell when we see or feel it coming, and by our actions, choose heaven instead. And someone at the workshop said, hey, are you a Maggid? And I go, what's a Maggid? I had no idea. I learned a lot about Maggids at that conference. The main thing was that there was a Maggid, he's still there in Brooklyn, New York. His name is Yitzhak Buxbaum, and he was training people to become Maggidim and Maggidot, Jewish storytellers. He was a student who had been ordained by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, the singing rabbi of the 60s. May his memory be for learning. And when Shlomo died, Yitzhak thought, I better start training people. Now, many people are doing this now, and it's more integrated, I think, into rabbinic schools. In fact, all our rabbis here in Victoria, great storytellers. Rabbi Lynn, perfect example. It's a great way to teach. And so Yitzhak gave this 2-year program. He's not doing it anymore. He's actually very ill. So if you do pray for people, please add him to your prayers. His Hebrew name is Yitzhak ben Charna. Through the mother that we pray for healing. His mother's name is Charna. So Yitzhak had a 2-year program, and we went there 4 times. We had storytelling jamborees organized by Yitzhak and his wife Carol, who's a actress. And most of our learning was by conference call or on our own. There was no Zoom. And we learned from some awesome New Yorkers, like a theater director, the chief storyteller of New York City, Diane Wokstein, may her memory be for a blessing, and lots of rabbis, either in person or on the phone, and even a preacher who just picked up a glass of water and inspired us with that. He was trying to show us that you can use whatever you have on hand to uplift people. And at the end of this program, Yitzhak ordained us. That's known as smicha, laying on of hands. It's actually a physical transmission. I believe that's done for rabbis as well. And he had this little ceremony in his apartment, tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and he put a tallis over each of our heads, a prayer shawl. And he put his hands on our heads and he whispered to us. Now, I don't know what he said to the other Maggids and Maggidot. I didn't ask and they didn't say. But this is what he said to me. He said, Shoshana, I see how good you are. Now, go, save our people. Oy gewalt. I'm still trying to figure that one out. So a story that really fascinated me during that time and still does, I got from this book. You can see it, Storytelling and Spirituality in Judaism by Yitzhak Buxbaum. He's written quite a few books on Jewish spiritual subjects, and I highly recommend this one if you want to know more about the subject. And if you go to page 33, you'll find the story. It's called The Storyteller and the Bishop, and you'll see that I change it because this is what storytellers do. Every time we tell a story, it's new. Now, the story is about the Baal Shem Tov, also known as Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer. And Yitzhak published a book about the Baal Shem Tov right about when I started working with him. The Light and Fire of the Baal Shem Tov. And you see the painting there. That's by one of my fellow students, or she was a student with me, Shoshana Brombacher, who's now doing her fantastic story paintings in Berlin, Germany. She was in Brooklyn at that time. So the Baal Shem Tov is considered one of the grandfathers. He is the grandfather of Jewish storytelling. We've been doing it all along, but he elevated it to a practice, a way of uplifting others. And he lived in Medzebus, which at that time was in Poland, from 1700 to 1760. And when the time came for him to die, he gathered all his closest disciples around him. And he told each of them what they should do following his death to earn a living and to continue to uplift the world. And to Rabbi Jacob, he told them that he should become a storyteller and he should travel around to the places they had been and speak about the things he had heard the Baal Shem Tov do and say, and in this way he could continue to uplift the world. Now a shadow fell across Rabbi Jacob's face. He was not happy with this new assignment. He said, "Oh, Holy Master, what's to become of this? I mean, how am I to earn a living traveling around telling stories? I mean, you know, stories are nice, but who wants to pay for them?" Kind of know how he feels. And the Baal Shem Tov said, Rabbi Jacob, don't worry. You'll actually do quite well at this, God willing. Well, the time came for the Baal Shem Tov to reap his eternal reward and leave the living bereft. And his disciples went out and did the things he told them to do. And Rabbi Jacob, he became a storyteller. Did all right, you know, but you can imagine his excitement when he heard, after 2.5 years of schlepping around telling stories, that there was this wealthy man living in Italy who would give 1 gold coin for every new Baal Shem Tov story that he heard. Wow, this is a storyteller's dream. I mean, with all the stories about that Rabbi Jacob knew, he could earn enough so he could live for a full year without having to travel around telling stories. So he put together what money he had, and he hired a carriage to take him to Italy. Now, it took him about 6 months to get there because he had to keep stopping in villages and towns and cities along the way to tell stories to earn enough for the next leg of his journey. Finally, he got to the place where he'd heard that this guy lived, and he checked around, make sure he's in the right place at the right time. Sure enough, people had heard of this fellow. He moved in 10 years prior, bought the villa down the road, fixed it up real nice, hired townspeople to work for him, and even had them build a really nice synagogue next door where Jewish people would come from all around to pray. And it's true, on the Sabbath, he would invite people in for meals, and he would give, after the Sabbath, 1 gold coin for every new Baal Shem Tov story that he heard. Well, Rabbi Jacob was very excited. He ran to that villa, knocked on the gate. A servant came, and Rabbi Jacob said, "Tell your master that the personal assistant of the Baal Shem Tov has arrived, and I have many wonderful stories to tell, all from personal experience, none from hearsay." Well, the servant was so excited. He'd become quite a connoisseur of Baal Shem Tov stories, and he was looking forward to some good ones from Rabbi Jacob. So he ran to tell the magnate the news, and then he ran back to tell Rabbi Jacob he should stay until the Sabbath when he could tell stories. Well, Rabbi Jacob had a great time. It was a real busman's holiday. He was exploring the beautiful Italian countryside. He was learning with the magnate, who was quite wise, and he enjoyed Italian Jewish cooking at its best. Kugel rigatone, veal parmigiane, without the parmigiane, because you can't eat meat and milk at the same time. Traditional Jewish home. Delicioso. Well, the Shabbat came, and Rabbi Jacob went to the synagogue, and they prayed, and then he went into the magnate's house. The magnate's wife had already lit the candles, said the blessings. The magnate said beautiful blessings over the wine, over his wife and the children and the wine and the washing and the bread. And then they ate this delicious meal, more songs and blessings. And then it was time for stories. And everybody sat forward. They were so excited. What story would Rabbi Jacob tell them? And Rabbi Jacob sat back to receive the absolutely best story for this place. And this time, oh, something horrible happened. It was as if a wind had blown through the mind of Rabbi Jacob and tore away every last shred of memory of his holy master. It was as if, heaven forbid, the Baal Shem Tov had never existed. It was your supreme senior moment. But this guy was quite young. This has never happened to him before. And he tried every storyteller's trick he could think of. He tried visualizing his master's holy face, remembering the words he spoke, the smell of the food that his wife cooked in their house. Nothing helped. Now, people were looking a little askance at Rabbi Jacob. Was he really who he said he was? But they didn't say anything because they didn't want to insult their host. And the magnate was so understanding. He didn't blame Rabbi Jacob. He said, look, you're tired. What's it now, 3 years you've been schlepping around telling stories? Have a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, there are 2 more meals of the Sabbath. You could tell your stories then. Well, Rabbi Jacob appreciated the magnate's understanding, but he had a horrible night. Tossed and turned, you know how that goes. Got up and he paced the room because, walking, excellent stimulus to the memory. But it didn't help Rabbi Jacob. And he started thinking, well, maybe his holy master was angry with him because he did recall he'd said to go to places they'd been before to tell stories. And as far as he knew, they'd never been to Italy. But then he also recalled that the Baal Shem Tov would tell the carriage driver to let go the reins, and by divine providence, wherever the horses went, that's where they went. So for all he knew, they'd been to Italy and he just didn't know. So that couldn't be it. And then he thought, well, maybe there's someone present who's not meant to hear a holy story. But then he said, nah, that can't be it, because everyone, no matter what stage in life you are, you can benefit from a holy story. So that couldn't be it either. One thing he knew, this was no accident, heaven forbid. Well, the next day he went to synagogue, prayed with all his heart and soul and might for the restoration of his memory, but it didn't help. The second meal, the Kiddush meal, no stories. The third meal, no stories. Now, people were openly hostile to Rabbi Jacob now. They called him a schnorrer, a freeloader, taking advantage of the magnate's hospitality. Now, Rabbi Jacob could understand. If he were in their shoes, he might feel similarly disappointed, but he might have expressed it a little more gently, but still he understood. And the magnate, he was so calm, he just said, look, you are a professional storyteller. This is your job. And this is Shabbat. We don't work on Shabbat. So wait till after Shabbat. You could tell your stories then. Well, Shabbat came and went with a beautiful ceremony called Havdalah, with a candle like a torch, and spices and wine. And then there was Malava Malka escorting the Sabbath queen with music and dancing and stories, and still no stories. Well, the magnate realized that Rabbi Jacob could go now because Shabbat was over and he could travel. But he said, look, stay till Tuesday. Maybe by Tuesday you could remember a story. Tuesday came and went. No stories from Rabbi Jacob. Well, the magnate realized that Rabbi Jacob could leave now. So he said, here. He gave him a bag of gold. Enough gold so he could live for a whole year without telling stories. And he said, look, Rabbi Jacob, if you remember anything at all, please come back to me. So bli nether, without vows, Rabbi Jacob promised. And he was just putting his foot into that carriage to go when he remembered. And he turned back and the magnate said, so you remembered? And Rabbi Jacob said, yes. So the magnate said, come with me. They went upstairs to the magnate's study, shut the door. They were alone. And the magnate said, "So Nu, tell me, what do you remember?" And Rabbi Jacob said, "Oh, it's a very strange memory. I haven't thought about it in 10 years, but it's all that I can remember. So I will tell you, it happened 7 years before my holy master died. And it was during spring, right before the Christian holiday of Easter, which, as you know, is a horrible time for Jews, especially in Poland. The Christian townspeople just go wild. They stage pogroms, they attack us, sometimes kill us. Horrible. So my holy master was pacing the floor all through Shabbos. He was praying that this terrible decree against us would be annulled in heaven. And when the Shabbat was over, he said, "Let's go." Well, we knew what that meant. Myself and a few other disciples, we got into the carriage with the Baal Shem Tov. He told the carriage driver to let go of the reins, and then, by divine providence, wherever we went, wherever the horses went, that's where we ended up. We ended up in a really strange town. I'd never seen it before and never seen it since. But there was all these people in the central square gathering around a stage. We didn't go towards them. We went to a Jewish house. You could tell the mezuzah in the door indicated it was a Jewish house. And Baal Shem Tov went up to the door, knocked on it. And a woman opened the door. And when she saw us, her face went white with fright. She said, "What are you doing here? Polish Jews dressed as you are outside at this time. Are you meshuggah? Are you crazy? Don't you know what they'll do to you? They'll grab you. They'll beat you. They might even kill you." So you know what we do? We hide. So then you know what they do? They draw lots. And whoever lot gets chosen, they come for him. They drag him from the house, beat him, sometimes kill him. And this year, oi gewalt, they've chosen our holy rabbi. Oh, heaven help us. Come in before they get you too. Well, we were very scared, but the Baal Shem Tov, it was like the information went in one ear and out the other. You know, people like this. He just walked right into the house. We followed him. He went upstairs to a room where all the curtains were drawn. He went up to the curtains and he opened them so that we could see out to the square where people were gathering. Well, the people in the house were very frightened. They said, "What are you doing? Don't you realize if you can see them, they can see us. They'll come for us. They'll kill us. Shut the curtains." He didn't pay any attention to what they were saying. He just looked out the window and indicated that I should look too. He pointed to a house across the square. And church bells rang. And as they did, the door of that house opened and out walked a very finely dressed man. And the Baal Shem Tov said to me, he said, "Rabbi Jacob, you see that man? He's a bishop. When he gets to the stage, I want you to go to him and tell him I'm here and he should come to me at once." Well, the people in the room were aghast. How could he send this young Jew to certain death? And believe me, I was scared, but I trusted my holy master, and so I went. And those people, they did nothing to stop me. They couldn't believe I was walking in front of them. Their jaws dropped. And they just stood there. And I went right up onto the stage. And I said to the bishop in Yiddish, I said, "Der Baal Shem Tov is do. Kommen zu ihn, gleich. The Baal Shem Tov is here. Come to him immediately." He said, "I know, but look, there's all these people waiting for me to give my Easter speech. Let me give my Easter speech, and then I will come. You go tell him that." So what could I do? I went and told the Baal Shem Tov what the bishop had said, and he was very angry. He said, "You go back to that bishop. You tell him not to be a fool. Come to me once." What could I do? I went back. And this time the bishop wouldn't even look at me. So I pulled on his robe and I said, again in Yiddish, "Sei nicht ein Narr. Komm, gleich. Don't be a fool. Come immediately." And he did. He told the people he'd be back. And he went with me into the house, went into a room with the Baal Shem Tov. He stayed in there for 2 hours. After 2 hours, the Baal Shem Tov emerged alone. And he said, let's go. And I don't know what the Baal Shem Tov said to that bishop, because he didn't say, and I didn't ask, but it's all I can remember. So this is what I have told you. Now tears were streaming down the cheeks of that magnate. Maybe you've guessed why. He said, I can tell you exactly what the Baal Shem Tov said to that bishop, because you see, I was that bishop. I was not always a pious Jew. My parents were pious people, and they raised me to be so, but I don't know, something happened in my youth. I turned astray, aside, and I left the ways of our people, converted to Catholicism. Now, these things happen, and it's sad for our people because we're small. But for me, it was worse. The higher I rose within the Catholic Church, the more cruel I became to my own people. And every Easter, I would incite a pogrom with my Easter speech. Now, fortunately for me, I had holy ancestors who went to the Baal Shem Tov in his dreams and convinced him to come and save my soul. And I promised I would do so. He came to me every night in my dreams and asked me to leave my position before my next Easter speech, which I promised to do. But you know, when those church bells rang, and I knew they were ringing for me, there was so much honor in that, so much kavod. I couldn't resist. I just had to give my Easter speech. And then when you turned up, Oy Gewalt, and you spoke to me in the Mama Loshen, in Yiddish, I wanted to go with you. But my Yetzer Hara, my will to do evil, was so strong. It knew if I just gave that Easter speech, it would have me in its grips forever. So I sent you away. And then you came back again, and again you spoke to me in the Mama Loshen. Oy, it was as if my holy parents were with you there. And that strengthened my Yetzer HaTov, my will to do good. So I left the stage and went with you. And the Baal Shem Tov told me what I needed to do teshuva, to turn myself around. I was very wealthy, so I had to give half my wealth to the poor, a quarter to the king, so he would let me go, and a quarter I could invest in this property now. And there were many things I had to do, many mitzvahs, many commandments for the rest of my life. And the Baal Shem Tov told me I would know I had been forgiven when someone came and told me my story. Now, when you arrived, I recognized you right away. And when you couldn't tell a story, I knew it was my fault. So I prayed all through the Sabbath that my memory would be restored, but it didn't help. And then after the Sabbath, I tried every mitzvah, every commandment, especially to do with tzedakah, with charity, not just giving money. I was feeding people, clothing them, visiting the sick. As you can see, nothing helped. And when I thought you were going to go, I figured, that's it, my soul is going to die. So I said Vidui, the confessional prayers we say before death, and those holy words must have reached the ears of the Holy One, for you remembered, and you came back to me. Baruch Hashem, praise God. So that magnate gave Rabbi Jacob enough gold so he could live for the rest of his life without telling stories. But you know, he realized he liked telling stories. Imagine that. So he continued to do so. He settled down in Medzibuz, got married, raised children. People came to him to hear stories. And he told many wonderful stories, including this one, which was passed from storyteller to storyteller to storyteller till it was given to me to tell to you. So that in your listening and in this telling, we can all move closer, I hope, to the time, in the words of Isaiah, when war and bloodshed will cease and a great peace will embrace the whole world. And may that day come soon and in our time. And if you want that to happen, you could say Amen. It comes from the Hebrew word emunah, which means you have faith. You don't know when that time is coming, but God willing, it'll come. And any good act, could bring it on, even a story. So the next story I'm going to tell you takes us to Jerusalem. I highly recommend, if you have water or tea or whatever you have handy, coffee, take a sip. This is a hot, dry country we're going to. And you don't really need to say a blessing before drinking water unless you're thirsty. So I'm thirsty, I'm going to say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihyeh bidvaro. Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, through whose words all things come into being. Amen. Always tastes better that way. So this next story I'm going to tell you is a personal narrative, but I will be weaving in some tales from this book in Yaakov. And this is all the stories of the Talmud that I mentioned were kept oral for thousands of years before they were written down. And the story takes place in May of 2008. And that's the spring that I got ordained as a Maggidah. And my mom said, bless her at that time, hey, want to go to Jerusalem with me? And I'm like, yeah, I just got ordained. I get to go to the Holy Land. Awesome. So an Israeli friend suggested that we go a week early. So my mom, who was 86 at the time, may her memory be for a blessing, she could acclimatize and I could too. So we went a week early. There was a big event coming up. We were there. I got a place under Mount Scopus overlooking the old city. It was great. And we had relatives in Israel who wanted to take us sightseeing. I'm all for sightseeing with locals. And we saw some amazing places in their car, but I'm not going to go in a car on the Sabbath because that's an internal combustion engine. I don't want to make any fires or have anyone else do it. But my mom's okay with that. She hadn't taken that on. She's cool. She goes with them, and I walk to the Western Wall to pray. And I started out by an olive grove, and I heard this sound over my head. Hoopo, hoopo, hoopo. Anyone recognize that? Do we have any birders among us? That's what it was. This is a hoopo. Amazing bird. That's wild. I'd never seen one before. So this for me was a lifer. I was seeing it for the first time. That's what birders call it. It's associated with King Solomon. I learned later in both Arabic and Hebrew legends. And Israel also chose the hoopoe to be its national bird that spring in honor of the country's 60th anniversary. I didn't know all this. I just thought, good sign. Continued down the hill. And then I saw an actual sign that said in Hebrew, Hakever shel Shimon Atzadek, the grave of Simon the righteous. And that name rang a bell, but I couldn't remember the details. I thought if I go to the grave, I'll find out. The grave was this way. I need to go that way to the wall. So I just thought, this is going to take a while. I'll check in on my way back if I have energy. So I continue up the hill, and two Palestinian elders were walking toward me. And one smiled, this beautiful smile, and said, salam, with a bow, peace. So I said, salam. And if you want, you could say, salam. And I thought, ooh, that's a good sign too. Continued up the hill. And this is a very busy neighborhood. It's a Palestinian neighborhood. People are shopping either to get ready for their Sabbath if they're Christian, or they just finished their Sabbath if they're Muslim. And we're all walking toward the Damascus gate, the most ornate gate leading into the old city. If you've been there, you know, curved archway overhead, smooth stones underneath from thousands of years of footsteps. And then the way opens up into this beautiful sunlit, pedestrianized street. I love pedestrianized streets, right? That was my field, active transportation. I'm in heaven, no cars, beautiful music and scents and embroidered clothing and tchotchkes, little touristic items I could be tempted to buy. But this is a Sabbath. I don't even have money on me or even a credit card. I'm just walking. I don't want to think about shopping. So I stay in the middle of the way, that road. And every once in a while, I see a religious Jew walking toward me. He's been to the wall. It's usually a young man. He's got children in either hand, and the children are having a nice conversation, and his lips were moving, but he didn't seem to be talking to the kids. So I'm thinking, maybe he's praying, saying psalms for protection. This is an intense city. And I'm thinking, I should do that too. Radiate peace. I don't want to be scared. So what better way to do that than recite some holy words? So I recited some words that I had just been learning the week before with my Torah study partner, Josie Davidson, who's a opera singer. So we didn't just talk about what we were learning, we were singing it. I did the melody and Josie did harmony. And we were studying from this book, Torah Journeys, The Inner Path to the Promised Land by Rabbi Shefa Gold, an awesome singing rabbi. And she will be singing. You can hear her on April 15th. The concert is just up in the chat there, her holy names. And I'll be there too. I was just a last minute addition. Shefa is class act, and so is our own Rabbi Hannah Teferet Siegel here in Victoria. She'll be singing. I'll be just before her warm-up act. So we were singing from Shefa's Gold. She had quoted from Leviticus, Vayikra, that's what we were studying, and from Lamentations and from Psalms. And we were learning about the sacrifices, and I'm so glad we don't sacrifice animals anymore. It's just such a relief we don't do that. But we still learn from the sacrifices. There are meanings for each one. So the first one I'll sing about, for me, symbolizes wholeheartedness. Second one, gratitude. Third one, teshuvah, turning ourselves around to be all we can be. Now, you wouldn't have seen my lips moved when I sang this, because I was practicing something from Rabbi Nachman of Wroclaw, a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who wrote that we can sing, we can dance, we could even scream, and no one has to know. You just do it inside. All the synapses go off in your brain. You get the benefit as if you did it without disturbing anyone else. But for you, I will sing out loud. Reach nichoach lado Shem, a sweet savor unto God, when we raise up ourselves, kosi rivaya, kosi rivaya, my cup overflows with gratitude toward you, Hashivenu lado Shem elecha v'nashuva, return us to you, oh God, and we will return. I was returning to the wall, first time in 36 years. Felt like I was walking on air, and I was also really thirsty. I hadn't stopped. I was so excited. I hadn't stopped to drink. There are white chairs lining the tunnel leading to the courtyard before the wall, and I make a beeline to one of those chairs that's available because I want to sit down and drink from my bottle of water. There's a religious man in the chair before that. He's different than the other ones. He's older. He's alone. He's looking right at me, and he's talking to me. Now, this is unusual behavior for a religious Jewish man. He's not supposed to talk to a woman walking alone. And I might have just ignored him, but my friend, Nomi Kasten, who I believe is here, she had just made Aliyah, moved up to Israel, was living in Jaffa at the time, so I couldn't see her right away. So we had talked on the phone, making plans for when we were going to meet up. And she asked me, so what are your plans for this Shabbat? And I told her, and she said, oh, be open to anyone you might meet near the wall, because who knows? Someone might have something to teach you. And I'm thinking, maybe it's this guy. So I asked him if he was doing Keruv, which would explain his behavior, because that would be a part of an agency bringing Jews closer to Judaism. He said no. Actually, he'd just been to the wall. He was tired. He's resting before he goes home to his wife and children. So he asked me what brought me here. And I said, well, it's been 36 years since I was last here. So right now I just need to prepare myself. And he goes, what? Were you like 2 when you were here last time? Now, I still had gray hair even then. He knows I'm no spring chicken. He's a kibitzer. He's joking around, trying to set me at ease. I recognize his humor, and I really did need to sit beside him. So we're talking about Mossar, Jewish ethics. We've read some of the same books. He particularly liked one book called Tomer Devorah, The Palm Tree of Deborah, written by Moshe Cordovero, a great Kabbalist in the 1500s in northern Israel, Tzfat. And it's about the 13 attributes of God, that we should be kind and loving and slow to anger. And he really liked this. So as we were talking, this man whose name is Raphael, which means God's healing, he learned I'm a storyteller, so naturally he wants to tell me his story. And to do so, he's got to launch into this explanation of Shimon Atzadek. Remember, I had just passed his grave wondering who he was? I hadn't told Raphael, and I could have come from anywhere. He didn't know where I was coming from. It was a big city. He just needed to tell me about Shimon Atzadek because he's very important to Raphael's story. He said, Shimon Atzadek was a high priest during the time of the Second Temple, and he's considered one of the last high priests that still had miracles occur when he led the service in the temple. And when those miracles stopped happening, he would know it's time to retire. But way before then, he was just getting started. Shimon Atzadek saved the city of Jerusalem from destruction. Because you see, Alexander the Great was coming on his big white horse with his entire army to destroy the temple. So Shimon Atzadek, he put on the turban that the high priest wears and the long robes with the bells that rang as he walked. And he walked all night long with his entourage of Levite priests. But here's the thing, in Yaakov, that book I showed you from the Talmud, they had this discussion, the rabbis, was this okay? Because he was only supposed to wear the clothing inside the temple, and he wore it outside. But we have a really important rule in Judaism. I love this rule. Pekuach hanefesh, to save a life or to save a soul. To save a soul and save a life, you could break a rule. And Shimon Atzadek was going to save an entire city. Because if the temple was destroyed, people would rise up to protect it and they would die against Alexander. So Alexander sees this priest coming, dressed like he is, and he gets off his big horse and he bows to the ground. Now the Samaritans, these aren't the good ones. These are the ones that are promoting violence. They want the temple destroyed. They said, what are you doing? Bowing to this man. He's a Jew. You're a king. Get up. But Alexander said, no, I see a vision of this man dressed this way before I go out to every successful battle. And one of the Levite priests said, no. So you're going to destroy the house in which this man prays for peace for you and for all people? Because you see, we're encouraged to pray for peace for our enemies. Because if our enemies have peace, they may not be our enemies anymore. Can you imagine that? So Alexander decided not to destroy the temple. And Shimon Atzadek had saved the city. Now people go to the grave of Shimon Atzadek for healing. And Raphael went there when he first arrived in Israel. He was not an Israeli. He's also a Baal Shuva like me. Came from California. And like a lot of us North American Jews, maybe you're one, we can read Hebrew, but we have absolutely no idea what we're reading. No meaning, maybe a little bit here and there. And that's how it was for Raphael at first. So he reads his prayer at the grave. And he said, even though he didn't understand it, he said he felt healed of physical and psychological ailments he had. And even those he didn't even know he had. And to give me an example of the healing he experienced, he said one day he was more established as a religious Jew. He was going to yeshiva, the religious college. He was married. And he was thinking about that book, Tomer Devorah, Palm Tree of Devorah, about how he needed to be kind and loving and slow to anger. He thinks he's getting it. He looks up just in time to see the ear of a driver speaking on a cell phone. Now, Raphael had worked in ballistics back in California. He was a physics major, bomb maker. And he worked out the trajectory of where he needed to be on that crosswalk to be safe. But you know, physics and traffic safety, different stories. He was hit, flew through the air, landed on his back on the pavement. At first he was in shock. He said the pavement felt like a feather bed. And he did this mental check over his body. There was this red light over his left leg. Something was wrong. And this this non-Jewish woman comes up to him and says, are you all right? Well, I think we can forgive Raphael because in that moment he felt angry. Nope, he wasn't okay. He'd just been hit by a car. The ground now feels like a bed of nails. It feels like he's got hot soup spilled on his chest, and there's definitely something wrong with his left leg. But he said absolutely nothing because he was dressed as a religious Jew. If he spoke now in anger, this non-Jewish woman is going to think, whoa, religious Jews, angry people, must have an angry God. And that would be a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. And he didn't want to do that. So he stayed quiet. And then she asked what he thought, and I think is a better question. She said, what can I do to help? So as a religious Jew, he's not going to stand unless he has his kippah on, his head covering, which reminds him before whom he stands. And it had fallen on the crosswalk where if he had reached that spot, he'd have been safe. So he says to the woman, please, get me my kippah, because he thinks it'll help him stand. And she says, what's a kippah? So he says, there's two hats. There's a big one and a little one. The big one went over it. And he said, please get me the little hats. So she gets the kippah. She gives it to him. He puts it on. He stands up. She says, wow, where can I get a kippah? Those things are great. He explained it's not just the kippah that allowed him to stand. It's the tzitzit, the fringes that remind him to keep the mitzvahs, the commandments. And it was his visits to the grave of Shimon Atzadek. And he said these healings he experienced, and there were more. And the feeling I was having as I was approaching the wall, as if I'm just walking on air, I felt so elevated. He said, that's just a fraction of what the entire Jewish people experienced when Shimon Hatzadik led a service in the temple. You're going to want to go to that grave. Well, yeah, I'd already decided that, but I just hadn't told him. And then he said, but don't go alone. It's not safe. Used to belong to Jordan. No, yeah, not good. But I had just walked through that neighborhood. A Palestinian elder had said salam, and I had no choice. I didn't know how to get back without walking through it. So I thought, I think I'm going to be okay. And then after I went to the wall, I was praying in the women's section, and I was praying for peace and healing for the whole world. And it was as if all our prayers, men and women's, were being carried aloft on the wings of the rock doves that live in the caper bushes that grow from the wall. And I walked back 7 paces backwards out of respect. And then as I turned, I saw a sign that said the Shekhinah, the divine feminine, never left the wall, which reminded me of a song. It's an older song that I used to use to study Mossar, to bring these teachings into my heart. So I'll sing it for you now out loud. Here we go. I place God before me, always Shaviti Hashem, Lenegdi Tami, in all your ways know him. B'chol drachecha dehu, I place the presence of God before me, always Shaviti Shechina, Lenegdi Tamid, in all your ways know her. B'chol darkaich de'i. So there I was before the white hut over the grave of Shimon Hatzadik. I went through a little white door to the women's section. There was a woman in there all dressed in white who spoke English. So I told her a little bit of what I just experienced, and she goes, oh, Shimon Hatzadik, he has called you. He has called you. I'm like, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no, got goosebumps. I asked her if maybe the prayer was available in English now. She didn't know. She had to check with her husband, who's on the other side of a mechitza, separation between men and women in a traditional Jewish service. Some mechitzas are knee-high, some are see-through. This is totally opaque and so tall, I can just see this laminated sheet coming on over the top of it, and she reaches up, gets it for me, gives it to me. It's still all in Hebrew, and I recognized a few words, but when I was done, I wouldn't describe it so much as healing. It's more deep, deep joy. A machaya, as we say in Yiddish. And I heard laughter, women laughing, men laughing, children outside. Happy people in that moment. And I'm walking up away from the grave, up a hill, and I felt as if the presence of Shimon Atzadek was right behind me. And I felt these words reverberate in my being. La'at, la'at, slowly, slowly, I will walk with you. I will instruct you. I will heal you. And you and I and many, many other souls throughout space, throughout time, we're going to work together to try and turn this world toward peace. And just then I noticed there were 3 Palestinian boys behind me on bicycles. So I squeezed over so they could go by. Didn't want them forced into the road. Cars going fast, no way. And these boys, one of them waved to me and said, "Shalom, thank you." So from behind, they knew I was a Jewish tourist who spoke English. There you go. And I knew they were Palestinian without hardly seeing them. They get to the top of the hill. They get off their bikes and they wave and smile to me, and I wave and smile to them. Normal behavior in Canada, but in a potential war zone, to me, it carried extra weight. Now, I recalled that when I was about their age, I also used to ride up a hill near my home in Vancouver, get off my bike, stand astride it, and I would imagine I was coming to these very hills outside Jerusalem, and I would run through an olive grove, but I wasn't alone. I had an imaginary friend named Ahmed, and he was there too, a Bedouin boy. He came back to Vancouver, rode down the hill with me, went into my house, and then he jumped into this painting of Jerusalem, the hills around Jerusalem, painted in 1927 by an Israeli artist that hung on a front hall in my house. And now it's over my hearth here in Victoria. So now I'm back at the place where the hoopoe had sung, and I remembered that when I was in this land 36 years prior, I'd been traveling with my parents, and my father, whose Hebrew name we discovered after he died was Shalom, peace. He was doing research on peaceful social and cultural transformation in the 60s, how to change the world without violence. And we met all kinds of amazing people, but mostly driving around in a car. And what I really wanted to do was walk in an olive grove. So here's the grove, not in a car, no fence, sit down on the ground, lean against that olive tree, watch the grasses sway, and beyond that, I could see the old city. And I thought, if we could manage to create peace here, it could spread to all the world. Well, that night I couldn't sleep. Jet lag had set in. So I sat out on our balcony looking at the old city, and there was lights over the hotel, the wall, and the Dome of the Rock, and dust had blown in from Saudi Arabia, creating this golden spiral, and fireworks went off, just like they did here in Victoria for Halloween, but this was because it was Purim, festive holiday that we have in the spring. And in the morning, it was also Easter, and church bells rang, and there were prayers, calls to pray in Arabic from a nearby mosque, and there were swallows flying in a spiral pattern, and the city and all the noise of the city as it awoke. And in all that noise and sound and beauty and light and color, I felt the city call its name. So I composed this song. I'm going to end with this song. There might be some words in here you don't recognize. You can ask me about it. The foundation stone, it's a reference to a creation story. And hand in hand is also a reference to schools, bilingual Arabic and Hebrew schools. So here we go. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, foundation stone within. Creation story started here. From here, let peace begin. Yerushalayim, so long and hard we fought. Help us learn the ways of peace that our sages taught. Shimon Atzadek walked for the ways of peace. Together, slow, we'll find a way to make this warfare cease. Yerushalayim, Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Together, slow, hand in hand, peace for this sacred land. Together, slow, hand in hand, peace for this sacred land. Toda rabba, shukran, adank, haichka. Thank you.
Thank you, Shoshana. That was beautiful. That was so inspiring. Your storytelling skills are like a painter. I feel moved and inspired by your words and the way that you can take a life experience and make it so concrete and tangible. It's a very, very special gift you have. And I think you're really making a difference in the world by bringing your stories to us and sharing them with so much dedication and love and peaceful intent. It's really, really inspiring. So thank you. Um, we have about just short of 15 minutes, looks like 13 minutes left. I can't believe that